Hi, I'm John Feldt, and this is the weekly water outlook for the Midwest. I wanted to sort of start off by showing you a picture of some thunderstorms that developed this past Saturday, over southern Missouri and southern Illinois. This is very typical of the type of precipitation we're going to see during the summer months. It's a line, or very ragged line, of thunderstorms developed from St. Louis up towards just south of Chicago. Then it drifted to the south. These systems can produce actually quite a bit of rain. They lasted throughout the day. They're very hard to forecast because they're these mesoscale type systems. But these are really the type of systems that produce a lot of Midwest rain over the summer months. They're going to be hard to predict, but this is one that doesn't look like a whole lot, but it really does provide some very useful rain because it covers a lot of area and a lot of moisture is in the atmosphere, so it can produce very heavy pockets of rain. Now we're in a situation where some areas need more rain, other areas need less rain. Areas in green are soil moisture anomalies that are positive or wet. Areas in yellow are dry. Most of the Midwest is either neutral or tending towards wet. And I think generally speaking, Iowa, parts of Minnesota, northern Missouri, most of Illinois, Wisconsin, that's a region that could use some dry days, and we did get those dry days over the last week. On the other hand, parts of Indiana into Ohio, parts of Michigan could use a bit of rain. Now, I've got a rule of thumb saying that it's often easier to get more rain than when it's dry. So even though areas have been wet, I think that can be positive because once we dry out, that can be sort of an insurance to keep the soil moisture somewhat moist. On the other hand, if we're dry and form a negative feedback like we're seeing in the western U.S., it can be very difficult to replace that rain. And I will be talking a lot about that in all the products that I issue over the next couple months. So for the last 7 days over the Midwest, you can see the heavy rain over much of Minnesota, parts of Wisconsin. That area is getting quite wet, but I think what's also was positive last week is the rain over the Dakotas, parts of Kansas. And this area was tending towards dry, and it was good that we got a little bit of rain in there. And it wasn't all that significant. Green's only about an inch of rain, yellow's 2 inches, but fairly widespread. So that was a welcome rain in this area. Also, remember I told you this area has been very wet. This was pretty positive for the areas of Iowa and Missouri. It allowed that region to dry out. On the other hand, I mentioned this area here needs some rain, and you can see there that's been fairly dry last week, so those conditions really do need a bit of rain in parts of eastern Indiana into Ohio. But for the most part, as far as soil moisture and agricultural type operations and concerns, it's been a positive week for most areas. If we look at the surplus or deficit rainfall, blue and purple are surplus amounts of rainfall, and you can see that we had anywhere from 1 inch to 3 inches of extra rain, mainly over Minnesota, but then we dried out over Iowa and Missouri. That was minus 1 inch or so. We had warm temperatures, a lot of evaporation and evapotranspiration, so we did dry out the upper soils in that area. I think generally, from at least an agricultural perspective, we're in a broad neutral range in that area, so we can get back to handling a little bit of more rain. Okay, so let's talk about the weather over the next week or two. As always, it's always interesting. This is the current jet stream pattern. What we see here is the jet streams coming in the western U.S., then moving up into the northern part of the U.S., and this is a very temporary type pattern. We're going to shift throughout the week into what I call an amplitude pattern, or amplified pattern. And what it's going to do, you can see green, our blue is early in this week. So here's early in the week. You can see it's not bowed one way a whole lot. Sort of generally goes from west to east. But later this week, look at this. It bows in the western U.S., bows north, dips south in the eastern U.S. And that's what I mean by that amplified pattern. Then actually the gray line is the latter part of the forecast period. Next week, it's even more amplified. So the predominant pattern we're looking at over the next 2 weeks is one where there's a high pressure ridge over the west. That usually means hot and dry. Trough of low pressure over the east, and that's usually cooler and wet. And the Midwest is going to be between these two major patterns. So parts of the Midwest are going to be leaning towards less than normal precipitation and warmer than normal temperatures. And over the east, it'll be the opposite. Showery, stormy, and a bit cooler. So I mentioned that the 6 to 10 day pattern doesn't change a whole lot. So it looks like over the next 2 weeks, we're going to have this primary type pattern. So here's the rainfall forecast in the next 7 days, and it aligns very closely to what I just said. Sort of outline the area with that red line, solid line. Anything west and southwest of that area generally dry. So it generally looks like the western parts of the Midwest are going to be tending dry, and the eastern parts of the Midwest, anywhere from Wisconsin, eastern Iowa, northern Illinois, and then maybe even some welcome rain over Indiana and Ohio, that's going to be tending towards the wet. I don't know about this rain here. This is somewhat of an anomaly here. We'll have to see if this does develop. Models are showing that it's going to develop, but it's just a possibility right now. But generally speaking, looks like the western part of South Dakota, western parts of the Midwest are going to tend towards dry conditions. Eastern parts are going to tend towards wet. So soil moisture changes as we get through the week. Primarily drying soil moisture. I think precipitation will be scattered, but this is also impacted by that ridge of high pressure, and that will be bringing hot temperatures. We're going to have 90-degree plus temperatures over a fairly large part of the Midwest, Kansas and Missouri, parts of Nebraska, and that's going to be increasing the evaporation and drying of upper soils. I wanted to look out a little bit further, first to the 6 to 10 day, and then the 8 to 14 day. And this is a model, and take this with a grain of salt. This is way out there, but I look for general trends. And just sort of stepping back here, this looks to me like that 6 to 10 day with dry conditions in the western U.S., wet conditions being that yellow and orange in the eastern U.S. The Midwest is generally in the middle, again, in the transition, which would say that's more moderate precipitation, scattered precipitation. At least this model is saying that most of it would be in the middle and eastern part of the Midwest, perhaps drier up into the Dakotas. If we look into the 8 to 14 day, not a whole lot of change with scattered showers and thunderstorms over much of the region, with the exception of north and parts of South Dakota, which is still giving that dry signal. This would be generally a positive type pattern in that it's not forecasting excessive rain, but it's not forecasting very dry amounts either. If anything, it looks like it'll be a little bit below normal over most of the region, but not to an extreme degree. So the takeaway points from this week's briefing, as I mentioned, a building ridge of high pressure over the western U.S. with a deepening trough over the east. This is going to be a highly amplified pattern that's going to last for at least 2 weeks. Much of the Midwest, the western parts, will be under the ridge with hot temperatures, below normal precipitation. North and east sections more under the trough. Not much change into early July. I hope you are listening and reading my information. I will be issuing some information throughout the week. I'm working on my newsletter where I'll be looking very closely at feedback mechanisms that are setting up that'll influence the weather into the summer months. If you ever have any questions at all that you'd like to have me answer, you can always email me at john@bluewateroutlook.com. Thanks for listening to this week's briefing. I'll be talking with you again next week.